Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Good morning, everybody. How's everyone doing this morning? Little hectic here at the Web Summit, right? But really nice to be here. And my deck is up, right? We go to the first slide? Okay, perfect. So I'm really happy to be back here. I was here last year. This morning it's just going to be a very short talk, but I want to just start by pointing out what the outgoing U.S. Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, has said. He said that the biggest epidemic, the biggest health issue that people face right now in the United States, and I think this is happening in different ways around the world too, to different extents, is the epidemic of loneliness. Many of us feel very alone. We feel like ourselves are being represented through data. There's a sense of a detachment or displacement from ourselves, right? So this talk is very quickly me attempting to actually point the way forward around what I feel we really truly need to double down on as human beings, and we need to rally our governments, our media, our technologists in this direction, which is doubling down on what makes us human. What makes us human, especially at a time when digital technologies, at least in an analytical sense, are replacing or displacing much of what we've done as human beings. And for me, what makes us truly human is care, that capacity to be present for one another, and creativity. And creativity has been a big issue we've seen in relation to strikes in Los Angeles, where I live. I'm a professor at UCLA, from the Writers Guild to the Actors Guild to many others around intellectual property and so on. So what does it mean to push the way forward toward an economy and a planet more generally that supports care, creativity, and commercialism? And that's the issue I want us to all think about together this morning. So some ways you can connect with me and this sort of vision is through my podcast, which is called Utopias. And this is a podcast that has had many leading thinkers and policymakers and journalists and so on within it, including current members of the United States Congress, people who ran for president, leading journalists. In fact, every one of these individuals here on this screen has either been invited by the Web Summit or has spoken here at the Web Summit. But really, here's the key. At this time where many people feel cynical, many people feel alone, what are voices that cultivate that sense of care, that cultivate that sense of connection that we all know we really, really need as human beings? And this is also partially because, the podcast is called Utopias. Sorry about that. That was very quickly that I went through that. Yes. So thank you. So everybody please check that out, and we love your support with all of that. That's a non-commercial labor of love, this podcast. Okay. So I think part of what's occurring is this sense that many aspects of our life, from our sense of desire to our senses of consumption, are being constructed and algorithmically created for us. And this is partly tied to business models that have created the wealthiest companies in the history of the world, whose specialization on some level, and I don't mean this as a diss, I don't mean this to dismiss this, but their specialization in many ways is to own almost nothing and hire almost nobody. What a business model, huh? And to transact every transaction that we engage in peer-to-peer while capturing the data, right? So that's further adding to this sense that there's certain kind of displacement, that our lives are being governed and organized and ordered for us in ways that at times seem very mysterious and very strange. And then if you tie this to the classic questions around artificial intelligence and Alan Turing's discussions of whether machines could actually think, it brings up a whole other set of issues. So let's get to the bottom of what we mean by intelligence and what we mean by human action and human creativity. We have, of course, we know creative and emotional intelligence. That's well established. We know that non-humans, like animals and plants, have a certain type of intelligence that we might call distributed intelligence, distributed cognition. Think about how bees function or starlings when they fly together. They have a certain kind of disembodied, yet actually distributed cognition. But we also know there's a type of practical intelligence. And we also know that many aspects of what we might call human intelligence are based on irrationality. We know that humans, at least in terms of our actions and activities, and there's Nobel Prize winning work behind this, actually are irrational in many ways. So what are we actually talking about when we're talking about intelligence, right? And what actually do we do as human beings when we're in our best moments in terms of actually living lives that are thriving, that are joyful, that are where we have a lot of happiness, where we feel a lot of sense of connection, we feel a sense of purpose. As a Buddhist, we call it Dhamma, a sense of purpose. And I think this is important because there's a lot of anxiety right now that's tied to where the economy is heading, from job losses to the onset of the gig economy. I'll speak from the United States perspective. A lot of gig work is very precarious. There's a lot of anxiety associated with it, and it doesn't feel very stable or secure for the vast majority of people. And I can say that personally from my students' perspective. Many of them in the United States are actually wondering where their economic futures are going to lie. And this is directly behind the unfortunate, I'll tell my bias, election of number 47, Donald Trump, right? There's a sense of anxiety, there's a sense of grievance, there's a sense of concern. The working and middle classes feel alienated and disenfranchised. And this is partly because the economy, as you all know better than I do even, in the digital world, operates a little bit like a boogeyman, a little bit like a zombie type of economy. A lot of it is based on valuation and future valuations, like this example of Uber. Many of you know Amazon, for its first decade plus, lost money while it existed. Now it's, of course, doing quite well, right? So the same is true for Uber as well. And this is important because if you balance where digital economies are heading in terms of stock valuation relative to the macroeconomic indicators, at least in the US and the UK, we actually see that income is decreasing in the US, even if you control for inflation, which is quite high. And this is why there are proposals, including by Sam Altman, who I interviewed for my last book, about options like universal basic income and other models to try to ensure that this digital economy lifts all boats. But I wonder if instead of just thinking about this in terms of paying people for just being alive or paying people for their data, we can think about paying people or supporting people to live lives in directions that they actually thrive at, that they actually care about. And I think that's a very, very important thing when we see an incredible amount of money going in directions that feel a bit displaced or disconnected from maybe where most of us are as human beings right now on this planet. Because we're also seeing many of these AI systems and platforms more generally actually try to erode and flatten various types of diversity. So Darren Osamolu, who just won the Nobel Prize in economics, that's me with him, he actually has found in his research studies that AI systems tend to flatten diversity. So what if our creativity and our sense of care was actually that which fueled what we truly need digitally, which with greater diverse sources of perspective, but also doing the kind of work that we want to do best and letting the machines do the other types of work for us that benefit all of us, including our company friends, our corporate leaders who actually have developed many of these technologies. Because otherwise labor becomes a big issue, as we know with content moderation, example here from Kenya. But we also see similar examples with content moderator labor in relation to places like the Philippines with social media companies as well. So what does a new futurism look like? One that lifts all boats. And here I think we might want to think about what ChatGPT or other platforms or algorithmic systems that are increasingly governing and ordering our lives, what they do well and what they don't do well. They're very good at taking repeated procedures. They're very good at parroting existing data forms. They're very good at representing and representing some voices, but maybe not all of them. And maybe what we do very well as human beings is have that sense of serendipity, that sense of creativity, that sense that, hey, we're all here for a reason, or we're putting our bodies here for a reason, because there's something very important about us all being in the same physical space, grounding ourselves, locating ourselves, right? Really sitting and being present where we are. And so much of that is tied to that feeling of curiosity and that sense of creativity. This is a very simple way of putting it, right? We want AI to do our laundry and dishes so then I can do my art and my writing. Exactly, right? That's a very simple way, but very straightforward way of looking at what is actually at stake here. So that's why I've written many op-eds over my time including this around a digital Bill of Rights, which is funny because President-elect Trump is literally talking with the same language right now. So what that means, I think, is really the devil in the details. But for me, it's not about rights saying, hey, this is bad, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. Instead, protecting what we can do as human beings so that we can live lives that thrive. And here I want to point to, and in my next time at the Web Summit, I'll talk about this more extensively when I have more time, but I want to point to the visions of the Bauhaus. I think it's important to remember some experiments in futurism from the past, just like it's important for us to think of technology not just as big tech, right? Technology is not just generative AI or cryptocurrencies or whatever is capturing our attention at the moment. Technologies have existed for thousands of years, and in many cases, technologies have existed to build bridges between systems, humans and non-humans, humans and other humans, etc. And in the Bauhaus vision, the earlier vision, right? Walter Gropius, Mohanty Nagy, others, right? This great vision that came out of this continent. Let me remind you all, so much has come from this continent. There is a vision for a future economy that was built upon not just commercialism or what AI systems do, which is take analytical tasks we do and do them extremely fast and efficiently without us fully understanding them, but also a vision that is tied to creativity and care. So there was a vision described and discussed by the Bauhaus now 100 plus years ago, right? Of creativity, care, and commercialism. A tripartite vision for a future economy where work that we may do is devoted to what we do well and other work is delegated to these machines. And I think that's very important, and you might be like, why is a monk here all of a sudden on this slide? Because my own guru, my own teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, who I studied with, back in the day in multiple sanghas, used to coin this term. Well, he described a term from the sutras, but his term he actually described was interbeing. That actually, yes, we all exist as individual, independent, sovereign human beings, but your experience right now is very related and tied to who you're with. And even being present here with me. This is a very sacred and special moment. And what Thai used to say, Thai is teacher in Vietnamese, is there's no such thing as the lotus without the mud, right? And as a teacher, I know that fully well. I don't exist. My ability to be a teacher is not me talking at people. It's created through the connections I have with my students. So let's remember that as we conceive of future economies and future visions to where we may go. So there's so many things we can do, right? We can imagine human beings auditing machine systems, designing machine systems, collaborative forms of design. We can imagine human beings engaging in creative and beautiful artistic activities rather than delegating all art and art making to AI systems. And I'll tell you one thing, and you probably all know this. Human beings again and again and again do not want robotic systems to take care of the elderly or their little children. So there's something about touch and connection and care. So how do we get there? How do we begin to look at these futures? These are just some examples. That, I think, is really the key here. We can think about lots of proposals. Universal basic income, data micropayments, universal basic dividends. There are so many ideas. Paying for people's benefits and healthcare and pensions in ways that are shared by gig employers. But most importantly, what we must do and we can do and plan ahead, because technologies often, disrupt things deeply. But we can plan ahead and think about, right now, what do we do well as human beings? What do we care about as human beings? What does it mean to be alive on this planet right now? What does it mean to be human on this planet right now, given the incredible effects of these digital technologies? And for me, that's about care and presence and about creativity. So let's think about digital futures policies that support this sort of vision of life, because that gives people the type of enabling and activity and creativity that they truly, truly need to thrive. And I think we have this vision right here and now in front of us. And regardless of who is president or who isn't, who is prime minister and who isn't, I think it's truly time to re-embrace some of these visions of the past to look toward the future, like the Bauhaus's vision. So more on this soon from me. Please check out the podcast, and happy to be with you all this morning. Thank you so much for having me.